Hello and welcome to The Mirror. This is episode 2 of NovyMirror. My name is Rick Novy, and today my special guest is Aliette de Bodard. Before we get on with that, if you were here for the last episode, or if you saw it, you'll realize that I had some microphone problems. I want to let you know for sure that microphone, I brought it in and I said, "You're fired." And I have a replacement right here in this box, and hopefully we won't have that problem again. So, last time, if you were wondering what the background was, I'll tell you what it is now. That was Jupiter. And today we have a different background. See if you can figure out what it is, and I'll let you know next time. And now on with the interview with Aliette de Bodard. Aliette is a speculative fiction writer from France. She is a native of France, but writes exclusively in English for her speculative fiction. She is a finalist for the Campbell Award for Best New Writer this year, and she's also been a winner in the Writers of the Future contest. Welcome, Aliette, and nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much for the welcome, as well as for giving me the opportunity to do this interview.
For my first question, you have, along with myself and some mutual acquaintances such as Mary Robinette Kowal, Eric James Stone, and a few others, have attended Orson Scott Card's literary boot camp. Can you tell me what that meant for you and how the networking that you accomplished there has helped your career?
What I did get out of boot camp, the most immediate benefits, were having writing lessons done by a professional and a scarily good storyteller who knows exactly what makes a story tick and what makes the story not work. And he made me aware, Orson Scott Card made me aware of a number of things that I was doing with my writing that were not quite right, and gave me some very easy methods that I could use to fix them. And once those lessons had sunk in, that allowed me to take my writing to a new level. I'm afraid that during the whole boot camp experience I didn't do a whole lot of networking because I came to boot camp completely jet-lagged and I never really recovered during the week. And I spent most of it actually reading all the other stories from the other participants that were supposed to critic, and not actually doing any networking per se. Where I did do the networking was subsequent to boot camp. I joined Codex online writing workshop, which was founded by Luke Reid, who's an other Orson Scott Card boot camper, and who set up this online writing workshop where you can attend if you've been to a major by-audition writing workshop, which includes boot camp. And when I joined Codex, that was when I started to meet other people who had been to previous iterations of bootcamp, such as you, such as Eric James Stone, such as Mary Kowal, and a number of subsequent attendees after my year also. And Codex is where I do a lot of my online networking, where I hang out to have fascinating discussions about writing itself and about markets and about submissions opportunities and general aspects of the writer's life. So I did not per se do any networking while I was in bootcamp, but in a way you could say that bootcamp allowed me to get to the stage where I could network.
Your first language is French, yet you write in English at a very high level. How does that influence your writing, and do you find it difficult to write in a foreign language? And also, do you ever write fiction in French, and do you translate your own work into your native tongue?
I have a very peculiar relation with the English language. It is not the language I use in my day-to-day life. It is not the language I use at my day job. It is not the language I used to communicate with my friends and families. It is not the language I was born with. That would be French in all cases. However, English is the language that I do write in, and it is more than that. It is the language I associate all writing-related activities with. It is the language I use to communicate with editors. It is the language I use to talk to other writers, and the language, finally, that I do my research in, and the language that I read science fiction in and discuss science fiction in. And the reason I have done this is because I am trying, however consciously or unconsciously, to compartmentalize my life and to make sure that writing remains associated with English. The main reason I do this is you have to understand that the hardest part of being fluent in a foreign language is that you become mostly incapable of doing very quick on-the-fly translations. Because one of the first signs of proficiency in a language is when you stop mentally translating from your native tongue into this language and you start thinking in the language. So, for instance, when I am sitting there and talking to you, what I am actually doing is thinking in English all the way through. I could not speak as fast as I do, if I were not thinking in English at this point. And if I want to translate anything from French, what I have to do is take the French word, think of what it means for me, think of what its significance is, what concept it actually expresses, take that concept and mentally translate it into English, and then think, alright, I am in English now, what words would I use to express this concept? So there is a phase that is time consuming and that is totally inefficient. So the goal when I am writing in English is to prevent any switching between languages. So if you want, English has to remain in this sort of very little bubble that is around my writing and that protects it from the evil interferences of French. I'm only half joking at that point. So that when I actually write in English, I just can put on the paper or on the page of the computer, whichever is applicable, the words as I am thinking them as naturally as a native English speaker would do, and with no particular difficulties associated with it. That does require, as you can see, a lot of groundwork. And this is one of the reasons why I haven't ever written fiction in French, except for very bad attempts when I was a young child, and that I never actually translate my own work into French, because translation is a very different problem from writing, and writing in French would require me to actually take the methods I learned and associate with English and translate them into French and do for French all the groundwork that I did for English when I was learning how to write, which would be time consuming and enough work for another lifetime, which is why I have no particular desire to actually go down that road. As to how being a native French speaker actually influences my writing in terms of contents, I'm not really sure that I'm the best person to talk to you about this, obviously being the writer. What I have been told by others is that from a language point of view, even when I don't make any grammatical mistakes, the English that I use has a peculiar consonance, has a peculiar melody that doesn't quite gel with what an English speaker would expect, and actually is unexpected and surprising and somewhat fresh, I am told, when I do it right. So I suppose that is not a great handicap, but it does color my fiction. And of course, coming from a different culture inevitably colors my fiction, because the themes I will choose and the plots and the characters that I will use will to some extent depend on what I have in my brain, and what I have in my brain is what I grew up with and what I see every day. So I can't exactly pinpoint the Frenchness of my writing, as it were, but I am pretty reasonably sure that the type of stories that I tell are stories that I could not tell if I had been born in America and had lived in America speaking only English for most of my lifetime. So there you have it.
You've worked Asian mythology into much of your fiction, and I know that you're part Vietnamese. Do you choose to do that because of your heritage, or is it something that you would have studied anyway?
That is a hard question, because to some extent you're asking me to imagine what my life would have been had I been raised completely differently and had I been born the daughter of different people, which is obviously not something that I would know how to do. I was raised mostly French Catholic, with the dose of Vietnamese culture, as my mother and my maternal grandmother, who were both Vietnamese, played a very big role in my education. I think that, yes, to some extent, that fascination with Asian cultures comes from a desire to reconnect with that side of my heritage. But on the other hand, I also use Mesoamerican mythology and culture in my fiction, and that is not something that you can explain with any kind of emotional or familial attachment, given that I have no particular Mexican or Peruvian origins. And I think that more broadly it stems from a desire to use cultures and patterns that have been, I would say, neglected in genre fiction. I think that there have been some tremendously good work using Asian cultures and using Mesoamerican cultures, but I also think that, particularly in fantasy, a lot of fantasy still remains inspired by Tolkien and by pseudo-medieval, pseudo-Celtic universes, which I love when they're done right, but I like diversity in my fiction, and I think it's a shame that so much of fantasy and science fiction is monoblock, is written by English speakers and for English speakers, and that so little work actually makes it in English translations, for instance. And any kind of diversity that you can bring to this field is more than welcome. And using Asian and Mesoamerican cultures is my way, however small, of actually bringing my own stone to this edifice.
Congratulations on being nominated for the 2009 Campbell Award for Best New Writer. And win or lose, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like and how it's affected you, and where do you think, where do you see your career going next?
Thank you. What does it feel like? I think the main thing it feels like is weird. I think to some extent there's always a part of me that's at the back of my mind, and that's telling me that I'm a really good imposter, that I've been very good at faking the whole writing in English at a professional level thing, that I have been very good at fooling people, but that one day, very soon, they're going to wake up and realize what a terrible writer I really am, and that it was a crazy idea to ever think that I would be able to write in a language that is not my native one. And to wake up one morning and to discover that not only have people nominated me for this major award, but that enough people have nominated me that I have made the short list, is, well, it is very humbling. It is very humbling to be on a list with people like David Anthony Durham, like Felix Gilman, like Tony Pye and Gord Seller. But it's also tremendous self-validation. And it's a sort of counter-voice to the demons of doubt, something that you can use to beat them with. See, I have been nominated for this award, and I think in terms of that, it gives me greater confidence, win or lose, and that is a good thing. And in terms of external benefits, I think the main benefit of the Campbell I have already had. It's the increased visibility that comes with the nomination. And following the nomination, I have had a lot of people who have come to my website, I have had a lot of people who have downloaded my fiction, I have had a lot of people who have read it, and I think that this increased visibility is the main benefit, really, of the Campbell, and it is what I intend to use and what I intend to build on, because this is something that cannot be taken away, whether I end up winning or losing the award, and this is something that we, all 5 Campbell nominees, all benefit from in equal measure.
Your short story, Butterfly Falling Down, is going to be included in Gardner Dozois's Year's Best Science Fiction. What do you think makes this story so outstanding to attract the attention of Gardner?
Well, I'm obviously not in Gardner Dozois's head, and I have no idea what he was thinking in particular when he decided to pick it for his Year's Best Science Fiction. Not that I'm complaining, of course. I am tremendously happy about this, that I will be included in a volume that I have been reading year after year. If you ask me what makes Butterfly Falling at Dawn so distinctive, I think is not so much the mystery at the heart of it, or the alternate history, though I have had echoes that the universe that I built for this alternate history, which is one where China discovered America before the Europeans and prevented the fall of the great empires such as the Aztec and the Inca Empire. I've been told that this universe is very interesting and very neatly thought out, but I think that what it has to the story has to say that is relevant is immigrants and cultures and the meeting of cultures, and to what extent as an immigrant from another culture you are expected to integrate in the culture, the dominant culture, the culture of the country you are living in. What is the balance that you can strike between becoming integrated in your new country and completely turning your back on your own roots? And that is something that I am very much interested in, and something to which I have absolutely no pretension of having an answer, but I think a problem that every country that attracts immigrants has to face at one point or another, and every family of immigrants has to face when you have a culture that is fundamentally different from the one that you're ending up in. Would you rather live in a ghetto with the other people of the same culture, or would you rather completely abandon your culture and choose to merge in with the dominant culture, knowing, of course, that there will be benefits if you do that, because all dominant cultures are intolerant to some extent. And I think that is a fascinating problem, and something that is well worth exploring and pointing out in fiction. And that is what I was trying to do with Butterfly Falling at Dawn, although I did not realize it typically until I had sent the story off and had seen it accepted. But I think that is the main draw of the story.
You've heard discussion in the speculative fiction community of the death of science fiction, or at least the irrelevance of science fiction, and questioning whether or not this is a dying form of art. What's your take on that, and where do you see science fiction headed in the future?
Well, I am not the world's biggest expert on science fiction, because what I write tends to be first and foremost fantasy, and I have only recently started to branch out into science fiction. But the way I see it, I think, is that science fiction, as we usually think of it, was associated with a very strong belief in science as a force for good and in progress as something good. When you think of what I tend to think of as some of the earliest science fiction stories, which is H.G. Wells and especially Jules Verne's, there is this fascination with science, with technical stuff, with all the new stuff that was happening around the Industrial Revolution and that was going to change people's lives. And I think that is a set of mind that was carried over into the decades that followed. And to some extent, I think we have become disillusioned with science. We have seen the damage that science and progress have done to the planet Earth, to our own ecosystems, we have seen that there are things that science still cannot solve. And I think the lack of interest in science fiction stems in part from that, and also from the fact that as a way to predict the future, I think that science fiction has become increasingly, I would not say irrelevant, but I would say inefficient. I think that we have moved from stories which purported to tell us tales of the future as it could be, to stories that are stories of plausible futures, but not predictions of the future. And to that extent, I think that we have moved away from the roots of science fiction, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think also that science is currently moving very fast, and fast enough that science fiction, which is the type of science fiction that is very much focused on technical progress and on the new gadgets that you could have, say, 20 or 30 years in the future, becomes very fast outdated, because those cool gadgets are on your desk or in the shops 2 or 3 years after you've written the story. So I think that's what I think makes this feeling of irrelevance about science fiction come from. I think that it is not necessarily the death of science fiction, that it is the beginning of a reinvention for the genre. As I said, I think it's going to refocus on futures that might be, on imagining new universes and using them not as necessarily as warnings as they might have been used in the past, like this is what will happen if you continue building atomic bombs, or this is what will happen if you continue devastating the planet, because I think that we have integrated those messages. I think that science fiction will recenter itself around telling stories of the future, telling stories of possible futures, of plausible futures, of universes that are just plain fun or plain weird or plain interesting to be in. Much in the same way as historical fiction uses cool universes from the past, I think science fiction will become something that uses cool universes from the future, and that uses them to tell us stuff about the present, but not anymore to warn us about the future, or to predict the future for us. And to some extent, I think a lot of that is already happening, and no matter how much we may bemoan this, it's going to be hard to change that reality. So that's how I see things.
And what's next for you?
Well, a number of things, actually. I'm currently working on a novel, which is an alternate history thriller, a sequel of sorts to Butterfly Falling at Dawn, the same story that is going to appear in the year's best science fiction. I'm trying to have a coherent first draft at this stage, and then I will lob it off to my first reader, and he will tell me if I have succeeded in making any sense. And once that is out of the way, I intend to go back to writing some short stories, and hopefully sell some short stories as well. This summer I will be in Worldcon for the Campbell and for the convention, and hoping to have a blast regardless of what the outcome of the Campbell is. That should tide me over into September, and then I think that we will see as matters develop.
Thank you for appearing on The Mirror. It was a pleasure having you on, and thank you for undergoing the effort to record your answers for me. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the audience appreciates it as well. It's a very interesting discussion. This went long today, so I'm not going to have a news segment. However, if you do have some press releases that you would like me to comment on The Mirror, please send it to mirror@cactusrunvideo.com. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.